Well, hi, this is Michaela Evans. I'm a parent educator with Kentucky Spin. And today we're going to do our Spotlight of Kentucky, where we highlight some of our favorite agencies working hard to serve families with disabilities all around the state. Today I have Barbara Green with Kentucky Partnership for Families and Children here to talk about their agency and the great things they're doing to serve our families. So Barbara, do you care to tell us a little bit about yourself and what KPFC does?
I would love to do that. So let me just first start by saying my name is Barb, and I've raised three generations of children, and two generations have had behavioral health challenges in the mix. So that's kind of how I discovered Kentucky Partnership for Families and Children. So I am one of those parents. Um, KPFC, or Kentucky Partnership for Families and Children. It's a statewide family organization. And we pride ourselves on saying that it is actually governed in partnership with both people receiving services or who have received services and those who have traditionally provided them. And so 51% of our board, of course, are those parents and families. And we also have two youth who have received services on our board, as well as some professional partners. So that just to give you an idea kind of what that might look like. In terms of what we do, well, we do a lot of things. But one of the things that we do is we bring the voice of family and youth to any state or regional level provider who will let us have a voice. And so we spend a lot of time educating professional partners and partnering with them in joint ventures or adventures, however you want to think about it. But um, we do specific trainings also for families and youth. Um, and our website has a whole list of those trainings that we're doing, and it's really cool because we have refurbished it a little bit, and we think it's going to be more user friendly. Um, we also have had a great deal of investment and effort into family and youth peer support, and have been an integral part of that becoming billable back in 2014. And we are an agency who certifies both family and youth peer support. So those are the types of things. Um, our website really contains a whole lot more of detailed information if people are interested. We have always we have a statewide, um, it's called Kentucky Youth Move because it's a chapter of the National Kentucky Youth Move. And it's a statewide youth council, which meets regularly and kind of keeps us on our toes and keeps us accountable to youth driven system of care and voice. And so one of the really cool things that have come out of that I have seen very recently was they done a lot of work on the Youth Bill of Rights, which is now we're beginning to see that everywhere. So that's kind of cool. And we received the Rock Star Award or whatever on the national level for the work that our youth are doing. Um, and although we have staff attached to them that aren't youth, it is a very youth driven effort. So really, really proud of that. We do conferences and opportunities for families and youth in particular. Of course, a lot of that's gonna been put on hold for AC, which is after COVID, so that we can be in person again. But we do a what we call a joint meeting twice a year, and that meeting really focuses on gathering up family and youth leaders across the state and really asking for input and allowing them to kind of set our agenda for the work that we're doing on the state level. And then we do Youth Parent Conference, which is the conference where we bring a lot of adolescents and their parents together. And the youth involved are the planners and implementation team for those efforts as well. And then, so there's all kinds of opportunities like that, conferences, the Leadership Academy, which is where a lot of our family and youth really start to get involved, and then later on might move really to becoming a peer support specialist. So as you can see, I could talk 3 hours, just the kinds of things that we do. But all of our work is really centered around families and youth, and partnering with both them and the professionals who desire to serve us the best they can. We're also a gatekeeper for true system of care.
Wonderful. Sounds like you guys have your hands full with all the wonderful opportunities you have to serve families and youth with behavioral challenges. One of the things that I love most about Kentucky Partnership for Families and Children is how involved you get the parents and the youth in everything that you do. So I feel like there's definitely an equal representation not only of specialists and people providing services, but also the ones that need services. And I feel like that's really how you get to the heart of what the needs are for families, is by asking them. So I love that you guys really incorporate the families and the youth into what you do. Do you care to share a little bit about your why and how you got in the field of helping families with behavioral challenges and what keeps you here?
Absolutely, yes. I would absolutely like to share that because I think it really provides testimony to the need of who we are and what we do. I was one of those parents that some of our providers described as being resistant, non-compliant. I mean, you know, all of those words they associate with those of us who may not be chomping at the bits to receive services. So that's kind of where I came from. Of course, in my other life, or in my background, I was a social justice activist. And so I've spent a lot of time working on families and children's issues in different ways. And now that has kind of just come to bear on behavioral health. And so a lot of it is around empowering families and youth to feel capable and responsible for their own destiny, and to self-advocate that way. So was not really sold on this whole partnership thing until someone discovered something in me that I hadn't yet, and hadn't discovered my ability to really work in partnership. A lot of our families are, we live kind of from a crisis to a crisis lifestyle. When you're raising children with behavioral health needs, that sometimes happens. So having an opportunity, and I think I was back in a grant that was done, I don't know, 15, 16 years ago. I was actually hired as a family liaison to kind of bridge the gap between professionals and families. And so that was kind of my springboard, if you will, in behavioral health, after having received my own services, which were wraparound services that were transformational for my family. And so I kind of caught fire and became very passionate about this is a possibility, and speaking from a place, you know, where I would not have thought that. And so that kind of started my journey in behavioral health and this whole notion of family and youth driven. And I still feel like it's very social justice oriented. So that's kind of where I come from and how I became entertained. Now, I started with KPFC a long time ago. I mean, like a long time ago. Started off as a board member, I think, I don't know, moons ago, and then finally left the board and started on the staff, and have done some state level programming and thinking and building, and then have actually went to the ground level and built those things we were talking about, and then come back now to the state level. So I've
That's
been
one.
around for a minute.
Yeah, it sounds like you have a well-rounded background for sure. And I love that your passion comes from right there within. You've dealt with it in your own family. You know exactly what other families are going through when they come to you.
Right.
So you talked a little bit about some of the programs and services that you guys offered, and I know on your website I've seen the long list of trainings. You guys have some awesome things available. Is there any specific programs or services that you offer that you'd like to talk about?
There's a couple more I wanted to highlight. I was thinking when I was saying, oh, I should have told them about this because that's important and everybody's going to want to know. We house the state tailored staff, which is transition age youth realizing dreams. And so we have a state coordinator, a director. The project director is within KPFC, and then we have a youth coordinator who really works with all the drop-in centers around the state. And so those youth drop-in centers, we're also very passionate about that. And in the last couple of years, we've learned so much in providing peer support and building peer support. We have actually created 3 peer support drop-in centers for families. And right now we're working with the System of Care 5. There are some funds available, and we've been working to try to get them up and running, but they are amazing, and lots of wonderful things are happening, and it kind of calls us back to the roots, if you will, of families providing support for families. And so we're really excited about those 2 endeavors. And then of course we are involved in the System of Care 5 grant that Kentucky has just gotten, and are very excited about the focus, because they have decided to focus on a different population than many times we really have. And that is those families who are within the child welfare system. And this whole prevention and keeping families intact, and providing support to families before children wind up getting removed. And so that's been, we're very excited about that too. So yeah.
Well, rightfully so. It is very exciting news, and you guys certainly are doing some wonderful things. Is there something or any typical questions you get from parents when they call you guys asking about what you do or what you can do for their family?
We have a resource line, and so and our website, and so a lot of times, usually a parent, once in a while a youth, and once in a while a provider, but usually a parent will call that resource line, and what they need is just vastly different. It just kind of runs the gamut. Like, how can I get services in my area? How can I advocate? Who do I get in touch with? Because things aren't happening for my family that I think need to be happening. And so we have a person on our staff who takes those calls and kind of farms out who should be in touch with those people, follow up with those people. One, to make sure that they get the information and the resources that they need. And secondly, to make sure that that went well. So we also do the resources line as well.
Great. That's a wonderful resource for families to be able to use. Is there something critical that you feel like families need to know right now? Maybe related to COVID or just the
I
times
think
that we're in?
one of the things that we do know is that, of course, substance use is way up. right now. And suicide is way up right now. And people who are receiving mental health services, the isolation has increased, and families are trying to educate their kids in the home and still try to work virtually. And it's like everybody else, and we've seen that all over, but particularly right now, they really are desperate for support. Yeah, until we can see our way through. I mean, I think the pandemic here in Kentucky, for sure, has really thrown a wrench into a lot of the advancements and improvements we had made in our state around serving families. And so we've had to back up and rethink about how to continue to do that in a way that, one, is possible, and two, makes a difference in their life. And so that's kind of where we are right now with that. We're all going virtual. I'm kind of an older chick, and technology is not my thing. And so just learning how to manage Zoom and, how to do telehealth and those things as a parent or as a family member, I would not have known those things. That just would not have been natural for me. So trying to assist families in figuring out how to navigate virtually has become a big thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, like you said, times are rough right now for everybody, and everybody's kind of stretched thin.
Yeah.
So it's certainly great that they have KPFC that they can reach out to for support. And so what do you want families that view this video to take away from our interview today in terms of the message that you want Kentucky Partnership for Families to convey?
Well, I think one of the things I'd like for them to take away, if they have never heard about KPFC, is you're not alone. There are others out there who have it's kind of like people who have been there, done that, available to help people who are there right now and going through that. And we do that in a lot of different ways, but check out that website. There's so many things going on. We're doing cafes and we're doing webinars and things that we think might be useful to families. And so, kind of look for that. We're available. That's the thing I want you to know. We're available. It doesn't matter that COVID is, we are available and will remain available to families and to youth. This is just one of the hard times. I mean, those of us who have raised or are raising youth with behavioral health challenges, this is just another layer of a lot of, hard times, struggles that we've been through. But we're here, and we want to be helpful. And not only do we want to be helpful, but we want you to help each other. And so we have opportunities for parents to kind of learn some skills and then share those skills, as well as the youth, with others. We're growing a movement of families and youth across the state that can really provide voice to what works, what doesn't work, and gives opportunities for people to be involved in ways that they haven't traditionally been invited to.
What a wonderful message that is to share. Barb, I'm so thankful for you for getting on here today and talking about Kentucky Partnership for Families. And I hope that this video will continue to serve families all over the state and do justice to what you guys are working hard to do at KPFC.
Thank you for the opportunity and allowing us to kind of spread the good news, because, right now, good news is real important.
That's right. That's right. Well, it was my pleasure, Barb, and thank you so much, and you have a wonderful day.
Thank you.